My 5-year-old came home from kindergarten with a drawing of our family. There were 5 people in it. Me, my wife, my daughter, my mother-in-law, and a man labeled Mr. Tam. I asked her who that was, and my daughter said completely casually, "The way you'd tell somebody what you had for lunch. He comes to Grandma's on Fridays, he plays cards with me. Grandma says he's a secret because you'd be mad. I'm 34, I'm a paramedic in Boise, going on 9 years, and I work 24 on, 48 off. Which means my daughter has spent her whole life knowing that daddy sleeps at the station sometimes. My wife Kendra is 33. She's a veterinary technician at a clinic out on Chinden. We've been married 7 years. Our daughter is Poppy and she's 5, and she is the entire reason I get up. Kendra's parents are Dee and Roger. Dee is 61, she was a school district administrative assistant for 22 years and retired in 2022. Roger is 63 and he does HVAC parts sales. They live 11 minutes from us in a ranch house with a big backyard and a trampoline they bought for Poppy without asking, which I now understand was the very first thing. Here's the arrangement, because it matters. My schedule is brutal and Kendra's clinic does Saturday mornings. So starting when Poppy was 3, that's 2 years ago, spring of 2023, Poppy started going to Dee and Roger's on Fridays. Overnight. Every single Friday, it was Dee's idea and it was, I want to be honest, a genuine lifesaver. Childcare in this town is $900 a month for a preschooler and we didn't have it. Dee offered, Kendra cried with relief, and I said thank you and I meant it. I need to say something up front so you understand who I was in this story before it started. I liked my mother-in-law. Not tolerated, liked. She came to the hospital when Poppy was born and she stayed for 11 days and did our laundry. She learned how my mother's stuffing recipe worked so Poppy would have it at Thanksgiving because my mom died in 2020. She is warm and funny and she is the person who remembers that I don't eat mushrooms. That's why this whole thing took 2 years. Because everything she did looked like love, and honestly some of it was okay. The things I noticed and let go. There are 3 and every single one comes back. The first one was the stability thing. Dee has a phrase. She's had it since Poppy was a baby and it's, that girl needs stability. She'd say it about the trampoline. She'd say it about us moving apartments in 2022. She'd say it about my schedule, which is the one that got under my skin. Because there's an implication in it. At a barbecue in the summer of 2023, she said it in front of 6 people. She said Poppy just needs to know there's one house that never changes. And she said it while looking at me. And Kendra's Aunt Val laughed and said something about how paramedics are married to the job. I let it go. Because how do you fight a woman for saying a child needs stability? Second thing, Fridays started expanding. The deal was drop off after dinner, pick up Saturday around noon. By the fall of 2023, Dee was asking to get Poppy right from preschool at 3:30 on Fridays, because it was easier on everybody. Then it became, could we make it Sunday morning instead of Saturday noon since there's church? And here's the part where I did try. In January of 2024, I said to Kendra, hey, I feel like we don't have Poppy on weekends anymore. That's like 40 hours a week she's at your mom's. And Kendra said, you want to pay $900 a month for daycare? And I said no. And that was the end of the conversation. Because she was right. And because I make $61,000 a year and she makes 42. And that's the whole argument. Third thing. And this is the one that should have stopped me cold. Around May of 2024, I have this pinned down because it was right after Poppy's 4th birthday. Poppy started coming home from Dee's talking about cards. She'd learned Go Fish. Then she'd learned War. Then, and I remember laughing about this, she came home knowing how to play gin rummy, which is not a game a 4-year-old plays. I said, who taught you gin rummy, Pop? And she said, Grandma, Dee does not play cards. I have known that woman for 9 years. She does word searches and she watches home renovation shows, and one time I asked if she wanted to play cards at a family thing at Christmas and she said, oh, I've never had the patience for it. I actually noticed. I said to Kendra that night, since when does your mom play gin rummy? And Kendra said, maybe she learned for Poppy. And I said, huh, and I went to bed. That was 11 months before the drawing. Let me tell you what else was going on in that stretch. Because the pressure was building in a way I didn't connect to anything. Starting in the summer of 2024, Dee got weird about the schedule in a new direction. She started resisting changes. If we wanted to take Poppy somewhere on a Friday, a wedding in McCall in August, a camping thing in September, Dee would get quiet on the phone and then she'd say something like, well, if that's what works for you. In the voice, the August wedding one was the first real fight. I said, Dee, we're going to have Poppy that weekend, we'll be back Sunday. And she said, I've had Fridays for a year and a half. I've built my week around that little girl. And I said, right. And we're really grateful, but it's one weekend. And there was this silence and then she said, fine. But there's somebody who's going to be disappointed. I thought she meant herself. I want that on the record. I thought a grandmother was saying she'd miss her grandkid, and I felt bad about it for 2 days. She meant a man. Second escalation, October 2024. Poppy got a stomach bug on a Thursday. Kendra called Friday morning and said we're keeping her home this week. Dee showed up at our house at 4 in the afternoon with soup, which is lovely. Except she came in and she sat with Poppy for a while, and on her way out she said, "Well, tell her Friday's still Friday. Tell her we'll do it next week for sure. Tell her Friday's still Friday." To a 4-year-old with a stomach bug. Like it was a commitment Poppy had made. Third one, and this is the one Kendra and I actually fought about. Christmas 2024. Dee gave Poppy a photo album, little kid album, the kind with the plastic sleeves. And it was pictures of Poppy at Dee's house, the trampoline, the kitchen, the backyard. And on the very last page there was a picture of Poppy sitting at Dee's kitchen table with a hand of cards fanned out in front of her, laughing. And there's an adult hand in the corner of the frame holding cards too. Just a hand and a wrist. A man's hand. A watch with a brown leather band. I looked at that picture for about 4 seconds and I thought, that's Roger. And I turned the page. It wasn't Roger. Roger wears a Fitbit and has since 2019 because of his A1C. I know that because I'm the one who told him to get it. I had a photograph of that man's wrist in my house for 3 months and I never looked at it twice. Okay. The drawing, the 14th of March, a Friday. I was off shift. Poppy came home from kindergarten with her folder and there was an assignment in it. My family. Crayon. 5 figures, all the same size, all with the same enormous smiles. Because that's how 5-year-olds draw. She'd labeled them the way kindergartners do, with the teacher's help on the spelling. Mom. M.E. Grandma D. And the 5th one said Martam. I want to be honest about my first reaction, which was nothing. I assumed it was a kid at school or a character from a show. I said, "Hey Pop, who's Mr. Tam?" And she said, "He comes to Grandma's on Fridays. He plays cards with me." And I said, "Oh yeah. Is he Grandma's friend?" And my daughter said, "He's a secret. Grandma says he's a secret because you'd be mad." I want to describe what happens in a person's body at that exact moment. I've been to 1100 calls. I've had people die in front of me. I know what adrenaline is. This was different. It was cold and it was slow and my hands got very still. Because here's what a paramedic hears in that sentence. And it's not what a normal person hears. There is an adult male, unknown, unvetted, with unsupervised access to my 5-year-old, on a recurring schedule, and my daughter has been taught the word secret. I got down on the floor with her. And I want to tell you how careful I was. Because I've done pediatric interviews and I know exactly how easy it is to put an answer in a kid's mouth. I said, "That's cool that you learned cards. What's Mr. Tam like?" She said, "He's old. He has white hair. He has a truck." I said, "Does he come every Friday?" She said, "Mostly. Sometimes he doesn't come and Grandma gets sad." I said, "Where do you play cards?" She said, "At the table, Grandma makes cookies." And I had to work not to change my face. I said, "Does anybody else play?" And Poppy said, "Grandma sits with us. Mr. Tam always says the same thing." I said, "What does he say?" And my daughter said, "He says, tell your grandma I said thank you." I called Kendra at work and told her to come home. She got there at 5:40 and I put the drawing on the kitchen table and I told her exactly what Poppy said, word for word. And I watched my wife's face go through about 4 things. The first thing she said was, "It's probably a neighbor." I said, "A neighbor who's there every Friday and who your mother told our daughter to hide from us." And Kendra said, "Warren, she's 5. 5-year-olds say things." And here's where I want to be fair to my wife. Because a lot of you are going to want to crucify her. Kendra is not spineless. Kendra is a woman whose mother has been the central fact of her life for 33 years. And when your mother is the person who kept the lights on and drove you to everything, your first instinct is not to believe the worst. Mine wasn't either about my mom ever. But I said the thing that ended the debate. I said, "Kendra, I don't care if it's the Pope. There is a grown man in a house with our kid every week and we've never heard his name." And she picked up her phone and called her mother, speaker kitchen table, Poppy watching a show in the other room. Kendra said, "Mom, who's Mr. Tam?" And I need you to understand the pause. It was long. It was so long I looked at the phone to see if the call had dropped. Then Dee said, "Where did you hear that name?" Not who, where. Kendra said, "Poppy drew him, in a school project." And Dee said, in this bright normal voice, "Oh honey, that's an old friend of ours who stops by sometimes. He's harmless. You know how she is. She gets attached to everybody." And Kendra said, "She said you told her he was a secret." And Dee said, and this is the exact quote, I wrote it down that night. I have it in a note on my phone dated the 14th of March. She said, "I said it was our special thing. Kids hear what they want to hear. Kids hear what they want to hear." I took the phone. I said, "Dee, what's his full name?" And she said, "Warren, don't do this on the phone." I said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm asking for a man's name," and she hung up. She hung up on us. We were in that driveway in 40 minutes. Poppy stayed with our neighbor Cassidy, who is 26 and who I have never been so grateful for. Dee opened the door and she'd been crying and she said, "Come in, both of you, this has gotten out of hand." Roger was in his chair with the TV off, which is how I knew he'd been told something. I didn't sit down. I took the drawing out of my jacket, folded in 4, in crayon, and I put it on their coffee table and I flattened it out with my hand and I pointed at the 5th stick figure and I said, "Dee." My daughter used the word secret. "Tell your daughter who this is before I do." And my mother-in-law looked at Kendra and said, "Sweetheart, sit down." And Kendra said, "Mom, who is he?" And Dee said, "He's family." Then she said it again, like it was an explanation. "He's family, Kendra." And Kendra said, "Who's family?" And Dee started crying and said, I can't do this like this. Not like this. And Roger, my father-in-law, 63 years old, a man who has said maybe 2,000 words to me in 9 years, stood up out of his chair and said, Dee, tell them or I will. And she wouldn't. She sat down on the couch and put her hands over her face and she would not say another word. And Roger stood in the middle of his own living room with his mouth open and then he sat back down. We left. We drove home in silence and picked up our daughter, and I sat on the edge of her bed until she fell asleep. I want to tell you about the next 8 days. Because that's when the family decided who I was. The first call came from Aunt Val at 8 the next morning, which means Dee had been on the phone before 7. Val said, Warren, honey, I hear there was a scene last night. A scene. I said, Val, a strange man has been in a house with my kid, and Val said, oh, sweetheart, that's Dee's business, she's a grown woman. Are you going to tell her who can visit her own home? I said, when my child is in it, yes. And she said, well, that's a lot of control. That's a lot of control. That was the family's position within about 11 hours fully formed. Not is there a stranger around a child. Is Warren controlling? Kendra's brother Nash, who's 30 and lives in Meridian, texted me. Mom's a wreck. Whatever this is about, you could have handled it without going over there like that. Kendra's cousin sent a screenshot from a group chat I'm not in, 13 people, where somebody had written that Kendra's husband is trying to cut Dee out of Poppy's life over a card game. A card game. Meanwhile, Dee texted Kendra 11 times in 3 days. Not one of those texts contained a name. They contained things like, I have given that child every Friday of my life for 2 years, and ask yourself who's actually been there. And on the third day, this one, which Kendra showed me and which I think about constantly, you don't know what I've protected you from. Kendra read that one about 40 times, and I want to tell you the moment my wife came all the way over to my side because it happened on the Sunday. We were making dinner and Poppy was drawing at the counter and Kendra said casually, Pop, does Mr. Tam ever ask you questions? And Poppy said, he asks about mommy. Kendra put down the spoon. She said, what does he ask, baby? And our daughter said, if mommy is nice, if mommy is happy. And then she said, he asked if mommy has my same hair. Kendra went into our bedroom and closed the door and I heard her crying through it and I did not go in, because I have learned that about her. She came out 20 minutes later and she said, I'm not sending her Friday. And that's the whole turn. That's the moment. We stopped Fridays on the 23rd of March, and I did what I would tell any of you to do. Kendra called the non-emergency line, not to file anything against her own mother but to ask. The officer was straightforward. No crime that he could see, but he told us we could look up whether anyone with that name had a record. He also said, and this stuck with me, whoever he is, somebody's decided you shouldn't know, that's your actual issue. Tam, that's all we had. We assumed it was a last name, and on the 26th Roger called me. Me. Not Kendra. At 6:40 in the morning when he knew I'd be off shift, he said, can you come by the shop, don't bring her. Roger's shop is a 2-bay garage behind an HVAC supply place off Fairview where he keeps a project truck he's never going to finish. I met him there at 8 in the morning and he'd already been there long enough to smoke 3 cigarettes, which is a thing I didn't know he did. He said, his name's not Tam. I said, okay. And Roger said, it's Tom. Poppy can't say it right. Kendra couldn't either when she was little. She called him Tam. And I said when she was little, and my father-in-law, 63 years old, standing in a garage said he's Kendra's dad. I want you to understand the size of that, and to do that I have to back up. Kendra's biological father left in 1996 when she was 4. That's the story I have been told since 2016. He was a drinker, he took off, and, this is the important part, he died in 2009. Car accident, out in Oregon somewhere. Dee told Kendra when she was 17. There was no funeral, there was nothing to go to. And Kendra cried about it for a week and then folded it away the way you do with a man you don't remember. Roger married Dee in 2001. He raised Kendra from age 9. He is her dad in every way that has ever counted and he has never once made a thing of it. I said, Roger? He died in 2009 and Roger said, no he didn't. He'd found out in 2021, Tom had written a letter, an actual letter to the house addressed to Dee. He'd been sober 11 years. He had stage 3 colon cancer and a prognosis he described as not great. And he wanted to know if there was any way he could meet his daughter before it went one way or the other. And Dee, 30 years after telling a 4-year-old's mother's version of events, and 14 years after telling a 17-year-old that her father was dead, could not produce a living man without the whole thing coming apart. So she wrote back, and Roger said, I told her to tell Kendra. In 2021. I said, Dee, the man is sick, tell her now while there's time. And she said she needed to think about it. She thought about it for 2 years, and in the spring of 2023, the exact spring that Friday overnight started, she offered to take Poppy every Friday. I stood in that garage and did the arithmetic out loud and Roger didn't stop me. She didn't give him his daughter. She gave him his granddaughter. Every Friday for 2 years, a man who has cancer sat at a kitchen table and played cards with a little girl who has his daughter's hair and asked her whether her mother was happy and was told to say thank you to grandma. because that was the only thing Dee could give him that wouldn't require her to admit what she'd done. I said, Roger, why didn't you tell us? And he said, because I'm not her father. And Dee said if I told, she'd tell Kendra I was the one who wanted her father gone all these years. And Kendra would believe her because Dee's the mother. He'd been sitting on it for 4 years, and then he said the thing that broke me, and this man does not talk. He said, I've been in that house on Fridays. I go out to the shop. I couldn't sit at that table. 4 years of a man going out to a garage to smoke while his wife ran that in his kitchen. I asked him if Tom knew. If Tom knew Kendra thought he was dead, and Roger said, that's the part I can't get past, because Tom did not know. Dee had told Tom that Kendra didn't want to see him. That she'd been told the truth years ago and had said no. That she was angry and had asked not to be contacted. 2 people, both of them wanting to see each other, on opposite sides of one woman's lie, and she used a 5-year-old as the only channel she could control. I did not tell Kendra in that garage's parking lot. I sat in my truck for about an hour and then I drove home and told her at the kitchen table with the door to Poppy's room closed. She didn't cry. That's what got me. She got very still and she said, say it again. I said it again. And she said, I have a father. And then she said, how long has he been sick? That was the second question out of her mouth, not how could she. How long has he been sick? Here's how it landed. It's been about 5 months. Kendra met him on the 5th of April, at a Denny's on Overland, because she wanted somewhere neutral and public and she wanted to be able to leave. He's 66. He's small. Smaller than she expected. He had a folder with him. Inside it were 41 letters he'd written to her between 2010 and 2021 and never sent. Because Dee told him in 2010 that Kendra had asked him not to contact her, and he believed it. Because he thought he deserved it. He's been sober since 2010. 15 years. He got sober 2 years after he supposedly died. The cancer's real. He was diagnosed in 2021, had a resection and chemo, and he's been in remission since 2023, which is the one piece of good news in this entire thing. He looks better than he did in 2021 and he knows exactly how lucky that is. He said one thing to Kendra at that Denny's that she's repeated to me maybe 15 times. She asked him why he kept coming to see Poppy when he wasn't allowed to say who he was, and he said, because it was the only room I was allowed in. Dee. Here's what happened with Dee. We did not do a scene. There was no dinner table blow up, and I know some of you wanted one. What we did instead was this. On the 12th of April, Kendra wrote one letter to her mother, an actual letter, 4 pages, handwritten, and mailed it. And then she sent one text to the family group chat she is in, all 13 people, with 3 attachments, a photo of the drawing, a photo of one of the 41 envelopes, addressed to Kendra at Dee's address, dated 2014, unopened, and a photo of the 2009 memorial card Dee had made. Because there was one. She'd printed a little card when she told Kendra he died, with his name and the dates on it, and Kendra had kept it in a jewelry box for 16 years. The body of the text was 2 sentences. The man my mother told me died in 2009 has been playing cards with my daughter for 2 years. Ask her why. That group chat went silent for 11 hours. Then Aunt Val called Kendra and cried for 20 minutes. Nash drove to his mother's house that same night and I don't know what was said and Kendra hasn't asked. Dee's position, through Val in writing twice, has never changed and never included an apology. It's this. She protected her daughter from an alcoholic. She made a decision in 1996 that a child didn't need a man like that. And she has been carrying it alone for 30 years. And the family has now decided to punish a grandmother for loving a child. She has never once addressed the memorial card. Not to Kendra, not to Val, not to anyone. That's the thing I want people to understand. You can maybe defend a mother lying to a 4-year-old. You cannot defend printing a card with a living man's death date on it and handing it to a 17-year-old. Kendra is no contact with her mother. 5 months. That was entirely her call and I have stayed completely out of it. And I want to say to any guy in my position that this is the only thing I did in this whole story that I'm sure was right. She is not no contact with Roger. He comes over on Thursdays. He and Poppy do puzzles. In June he told Kendra he was sorry for 4 years of silence, and she told him he raised her and that's not nothing, and I left the room. Tom sees Poppy now. Openly with us there about every other week. Poppy calls him Mr. Tam still because she's 5 and it's stuck, and honestly Tom likes it. He says it's what her mother called him. The first time Kendra watched him play cards with Poppy in our living room, she went out to the garage and stood there for a while. She said later it wasn't sad exactly. She said, I was jealous of a 5-year-old, Warren. Fridays are ours now. We're paying $520 a month for Friday afternoon care at a place near the clinic, and we are genuinely tight because of it. And I would pay double. The drawing is on our refrigerator. Kendra put it there in April and I asked her once if it was hard to look at and she said, she drew who was actually there. She was the only one telling the truth. One more thing. In May, going through the folder of 41 letters, Kendra found one from 2016, the year we got married. It's 4 sentences long. It says he heard from an old friend that his daughter was getting married, and that he wasn't asking for anything, and that he hoped the man was kind to her. Dee had it. In her house. during our wedding, where she gave a toast about how proud she was that Kendra had found a good man. So here's what I need to ask. Because Aunt Val told Kendra in July that we destroyed a family over a misunderstanding, and because Kendra and I still can't agree on the second one, was I wrong to send that group text to 13 people instead of letting Kendra handle her mother privately? And the harder one. Roger found out in 2021 and said nothing for 4 years, because he was afraid of what Dee would tell Kendra about him. Is he actually any better than the woman who did it?